The rain had just stopped when Clay turned off the main highway and onto the narrow mountain road that led home. The forest on both sides was soaked, the branches dripping under the dull yellow glow of his headlights. It was close to midnight. Clay kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other on a half-empty thermos of coffee, fighting the fatigue of another long day on the job. He was thinking about tomorrow's deliveries when something flickered in front of the truck. Two small shapes darted out from the side of the road and froze in the beams. Clay slammed the brakes. The tires screeched on the wet asphalt, and the truck stopped just a few feet away from the animals. For a moment he thought they were cats, but as the wipers cleared the windshield, he saw the tufted ears, the spotted coats. Lynx cubs, two of them, soaked and trembling. Clay's heart raced. He expected them to run, but they didn't move. Instead, one of them staggered forward, blinking at the light. It looked half-starved, ribs showing through its thin fur. The other stayed behind, mewing faintly. Clay sat still, unsure what to do. He'd seen wild animals before, but never like this. These two looked desperate, almost as if they were asking for something. He slowly rolled down the window. Cold air and the smell of wet pine rushed in. The cub closest to the truck lifted its head and gave a weak cry. Clay swallowed hard, glanced around the empty road, then reached for his flashlight. He stepped out, boots splashing in puddles. "Hey there, easy," he muttered, keeping his voice low. The cubs didn't flinch. Their eyes glowed pale green in the light, fixed on him. One limped toward the edge of the forest, stopped, looked back. The second followed, pausing every few steps. Clay frowned. Were they leading him? He hesitated. The sensible thing would be to get back in the truck and call someone. But the way they moved, slow, weak, insistent, pulled at him. He followed them off the road, sweeping the beam of his flashlight through the trees. The forest was quiet except for dripping branches and the distant hum of his truck's engine. The cubs led him about 50 yards in, to a small clearing. That's when he saw it. A larger shape lay near a fallen log. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then the beam caught metal glinting through fur. Clay's breath caught in his throat. A full-grown lynx, dead or dying, trapped in a steel snare. One front leg twisted unnaturally, blood matted into the leaves. The cubs circled her, mewing softly, nudging her motionless body. "Jesus," Clay whispered. His stomach turned. He crouched closer, careful not to startle the cubs. The metal trap was old but heavy-duty, the kind used by poachers. There were more around. He could see another one half buried under wet moss, a strip of meat wired to a branch nearby. He froze when one of the cubs brushed against his boot, trembling. The other whimpered and pressed its head against its mother's side. Clay's hands shook as he lifted his flashlight, scanning the area. Empty. Whoever set the traps was long gone. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Typical. The nearest town was miles away. He knelt beside the lynx, checked for breathing. Nothing. Her eyes were open but dull. She'd been dead for hours. Clay sat back on his heels, the beam trembling in his grip. The cubs' cries cut through the silence, small and broken. He knew they wouldn't survive the night alone. But taking wild animals into his truck? Illegal. Dangerous. Probably stupid. And yet, he couldn't just walk away. He stood there in the cold, rain-soaked darkness, the forest pressing in around him, two lives hanging in his hands. His thumb hovered over the emergency wildlife hotline he'd saved years ago but never used. The cubs looked up at him again, eyes wide and pleading. Clay exhaled, muttering to himself, "All right, okay." He hit the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then a tired voice answered. Clay's words came out shaky but firm. "My name's Clay," he said. "I found two lynx cubs, their mother's gone. You need to send someone, tonight." The call lasted less than 2 minutes. The woman on the line gave calm, precise instructions. Keep the cubs warm, don't feed them, and drive them to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Ridge Valley, 40 miles away. Clay agreed, hung up, and stood there for a moment with the phone still in his hand, rain dripping from his sleeve. He looked at the two cubs again. They were huddled against the body of their mother, soaked and shivering. Clay crouched down, gently scooping the smaller one into his jacket. It didn't resist, only whimpered softly. The other followed without protest. He wrapped them both in an old flannel blanket he found behind the seat and set them in a plastic crate in the truck bed, covering it with a tarp to block the wind. The road back to Ridge Valley was narrow and winding. The rain turned to fog, blurring the headlights. Clay drove slow, checking the mirror every few seconds. The cubs barely moved, just tiny shapes under the tarp. At one point, he thought he saw headlights behind him, but when he turned again, the road was empty. By the time he reached the outskirts of Ridge Valley, dawn had begun to lighten the horizon. The wildlife center sat off a gravel road behind a chain-link gate. A single light glowed from inside a small building. Clay parked, grabbed the crate, and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. A woman in a green field jacket stood there, dark hair tied back, eyes sharp but tired. "You the one who called about the lynx cubs?" she asked. "Yeah. Clay Harper. Found them on Highway 92. I'm Megan, wildlife officer." She stepped aside, motioning him in. The air inside was warm, filled with the smell of antiseptic and hay. Dr. Lauren's getting ready for intake. They moved through a narrow hallway into a small exam room. A woman in scrubs looked up from a table covered with towels and bottles. "Bring them here." Clay lifted the blanket, revealing the two cubs. Their fur was still damp, their eyes dull with exhaustion. Dr. Lauren checked their gums, temperature, paws, murmuring short notes to Megan. "They're severely dehydrated. Malnourished too," Lawrence said. "At least one's got an infected paw, probably from trying to free the mother." Megan took out her notepad. "You said you found traps nearby?" Clay nodded. 3, maybe more. One still had bait on it. Looked like someone's been using that area a while. Lauren looked up briefly. "Poachers have been active this season. Lynx pelts bring good money." Megan's tone hardened. "Can you take me there later today?" "Sure. But it's deep in the woods. Road's rough. We'll manage." She wrote something down, then looked back at him. "I'll need a formal statement, Clay. Just the basics. Time, location, what you saw. That's all for now." He hesitated. "This gonna cause trouble?" Megan gave a small, knowing smile. "Everything causes trouble out here. But it's the right thing to do." Clay stayed silent while Dr. Lauren finished checking the cubs, inserting small 4 lines, covering them with dry towels. For a moment, one of them opened its eyes, blinking weakly. Clay felt an odd weight in his chest. When he finally stepped back outside, the sun had risen over the ridge. His truck was splattered with mud, the tarp half loose. A man in a red pickup slowed as he passed, staring a little too long before driving on. Clay watched him go, uneasy. At the diner down the road, he grabbed coffee before heading home. The waitress, a heavy-set woman with silver hair, gave him a curious look. "Heard you been up all night. Folks say you found something in the woods." Clay stiffened. "Word travels fast." She shrugged. "Small town. Just be careful. Some people don't like their business messed with." He nodded, left a few bills on the counter, and walked out without finishing the coffee. The weight of the night hung heavy on him. He climbed into his truck, stared at the empty crate in the back, and drove off toward home, the sound of the cubs' faint cries still echoing in his mind. The next morning, Clay pulled into the gravel lot outside the wildlife center, just as Megan was loading gear into a state-issued SUV. She waved him over without much small talk. The air smelled like damp pine and diesel. "You ready to head back?" she asked, sliding a map onto the hood. Clay nodded. "You sure we'll find anything left?" "If the poachers are smart, they cleaned up already. But traps don't vanish overnight." She handed him a spare vest. "Put that on. GPS, gloves, camera. Don't touch anything unless I say." They drove in silence for nearly an hour, the truck bumping along rutted forest roads. Clay watched mist curl through the trees, remembering the night before, the cubs' cries, their mother's lifeless body. His jaw tightened. When they reached the clearing, Megan cut the engine. "This the spot?" "Yeah." Clay stepped out, scanning the area. The remains of the fire pit, his boot prints, even the patch of flattened grass where the mother had lain, it was all still there. But now, under the gray daylight, the scene felt colder. Megan knelt by a log, brushing leaves aside. "Here's one," she said quietly. A steel snare, coiled and half buried in mud. She photographed it from every angle. "Looks like they used aircraft cable. Homemade, but effective." Clay's stomach turned as he spotted another trap a few yards away. This one triggered, but empty. "There's more up here." They followed a faint trail, finding 6 more in less than an hour. Some rusted, some freshly set. A few tufts of fur and blood-stained dirt told the rest of the story. "Damn," Megan muttered. "This isn't random. Someone's running a full line." Clay crouched near a tree where one of the traps hung from a low branch. "See that orange paint?" he said. "Rick uses that stuff on his fence posts." "Same shade." Megan's eyes met his. "Rick? The rancher on Pine Creek?" "Yeah. He's been bragging for years about keeping predators under control. Used to sell pelts back in the day." Megan wrote something in her notebook. "We'll need to confirm it. Paint's not evidence, but it's a lead." They marked each trap on GPS, then loaded the evidence bags into the SUV. As they drove out, Clay noticed fresh tire tracks crossing theirs, thicker, newer. Someone else had been here that morning. Back in Ridge Valley, Megan filed her preliminary report. Clay stayed behind, leaning against his truck, staring at the hills. He wasn't sure if what he'd done helped or just stirred up something worse. That evening, he stopped by the center again. Dr. Lauren met him at the gate, smiling faintly. "They're doing better," she said. "Eating on their own now. You want to see them?" He followed her inside. The cubs were in a small enclosure, stretching and sniffing at the straw. One still limped a little, but both looked stronger. When Clay crouched, one of them padded closer, nose twitching. "You've got fans," Lauren said softly. Clay managed a small smile. "Guess so." For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. But when he walked out to the parking lot, his stomach dropped. Someone had keyed a deep line across the driver's side of his truck, from the headlight to the tailgate. A note was tucked under the wiper. He unfolded it. A single sentence written in block letters. "Stay out of the woods." Clay stood there, the sound of the wind in the trees behind him, the paper shaking in his hand. He looked back toward the center, where the cubs were safe inside, then at the dark ridge beyond. He folded the note, slid it into his pocket, and whispered to himself, "Too late for that." Clay sat in the cab of his truck, staring at the scratch carved across the paint. The warning note lay on the dashboard. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not Megan, not Dr. Lauren. But he knew what it meant. Someone wanted him scared and silent. 2 days later, Megan called. "We need to talk," she said. "Come by the office." Her tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. The Wildlife Department office was a low building behind the sheriff's station. Clay walked in, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Megan sat at her desk, flipping through files. When she saw him, she pushed a form across the table. "Statement form," she said. "If we're going to press charges, or even get a warrant to search that property, I need your written account." Clay rubbed the back of his neck. "You really think it'll stick?" "It's a start. You saw the traps, the paint, the tracks. That's more than we've had in months." He sighed, looking at the blank page. "You know what'll happen if I sign this?" Megan met his eyes. "Yeah, I do. But if no one steps up, they'll keep setting those traps. You've seen what that means." Clay didn't answer. The image of the dead lynx flashed in his mind, the cubs crying beside her body. He nodded once, took the pen, but didn't write yet. "I'll think about it," he said finally. On his way out, he saw Rick standing by the counter, chatting with the receptionist. Their eyes met for half a second. Rick's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Clay," he said smoothly. Clay forced a nod and kept walking. Outside, the air felt heavier. That evening, he drove to the center. Dr. Lauren was weighing one of the cubs when he entered. "They're gaining fast," she said with a tired smile. "Another week or two, and they'll be strong enough for outdoor runs." "They'll be released then?" Clay asked. She hesitated. "That's the plan, maybe. The state's wildlife board is reviewing relocation options. They might send them to the Denver Zoo." Clay frowned. "A zoo? That's not what you promised." "It's not my call. Budget's tight, and the board wants something secure. They don't like the idea of releasing animals that could end up back near livestock." He clenched his jaw. "They were born in the wild. They belong there." Lauren nodded slowly. "I know. Megan's fighting for them too, but she's got limits." Clay stood beside the pen, watching the cubs tumble weakly in the straw. One looked up, blinking at him, a small sound rumbling in its throat. He whispered, "You're not made for cages." When he left that night, the parking lot was empty except for his truck and a cracked beer bottle glittering under the headlights. Someone had smashed it on his windshield. He cleaned it up quietly, his hands trembling not from anger, but from something deeper, resolve. The next morning, he walked back into Megan's office. "I'll give the statement," he said. Megan looked up, surprised. "You're sure?" "Yeah. I'm done pretending I don't know what's going on." She slid the form back toward him. "Then let's make it official." He wrote for nearly 20 minutes, detailing every detail: time, location, the traps, the paint, the tire tracks. When he finished, Megan read it over, nodded once, and stamped it. "That's brave," she said quietly. "But it might get rough before it gets better." "Already has," Clay said. Later that day, as he pulled out of the lot, he noticed Rick's red truck parked across the street. The man leaned against it, arms folded, watching him go. No words, just that same cold stare. Clay kept driving, gripping the wheel tight. The road ahead wound toward the hills, where the cub's mother had died, and where, one day, he hoped her young might return. The storm came out of nowhere. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds rolled over Ridge Valley, swallowing the hills in gray. The wind howled through the pines, snapping branches and rattling the tin roofs. Clay was under his truck's hood when the first hail hit. His phone buzzed. It was Dr. Lauren. "Clay, we need help," she said, her voice cutting through static. "The generator's down, the cubs are inside. We're losing power fast. I'm on my way." He grabbed his jacket and drove through sheets of rain. Fallen branches littered the road. When he reached the center, Megan was already there, trying to start a portable generator. Lightning flashed across the hills. "Good. You made it," she shouted. "Lauren's inside. Help her move the animals before the roof leaks worse." Clay ran in. The air smelled of damp straw and disinfectant. Water dripped from the ceiling. Dr. Lauren was kneeling beside the lynx cub's pen, covering it with a tarp. "They're terrified," she said. "We need to move them to the storage room. Solid walls, no leaks." Together, they lifted the crate, carrying it down the hall as thunder cracked overhead. The lights flickered, then died completely. The building fell into darkness. "Generators not kicking in," Megan yelled from outside. Clay set the crate down, grabbed a flashlight, and went to check. Rain pounded his face as he knelt by the generator, hands numb. He yanked the starter cord again and again until it finally coughed to life. The lights flickered back inside, but the noise and flashing lights spooked the animals. From the far side of the room came the sound of metal scraping. Clay turned just in time to see one of the lynx cubs leap against the open cage door. It twisted, broke loose, and bolted down the hallway. "Damn it," Lauren gasped. "We can't lose it in this storm." Clay grabbed another flashlight and followed. The corridor was slick with water, the wind forcing the outer door open. The cub dashed through it, disappearing into the storm. "Stay here," he shouted over his shoulder. Outside, visibility was barely 20 feet. Rain stung his eyes as he swept the beam across the mud. A flash of movement, small, low to the ground, slipped toward the tree. Clay ran after it, boots sinking deep. The cub stopped near a fallen branch, trembling, ears flat from the thunder. "Easy," Clay said softly, crouching low. The animal's fur was plastered to its body, eyes wide with panic. Another thunderclap sent it scrambling backward. Clay lunged, slipping in the mud but managing to grab the crate cover. He threw it over the cub, shielding it from the rain. "It's okay, you're okay." His voice shook, more from adrenaline than fear. Lauren appeared with a flashlight, soaked to the bone. Together they lifted the cub back into the carrier. Megan met them at the doorway, yelling over the wind. "Power's stable for now. We'll ride it out." Hours later, the storm passed. The center was a mess. Water on the floors, broken panels, scattered supplies, but all the animals were alive. Clay sat on an overturned crate, exhausted, watching Lauren check the cubs one last time. Megan stepped beside him. "You saved them again," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Just didn't want to see them scared like that." A week later, the board's decision came through. Megan found him at the diner, sliding a paper across the table. They approved the release program. Ridge Valley's getting its own monitored zone. "You did that, Clay." He smiled faintly. "Guess persistence still counts for something." The release day was cold but clear. Clay stood on a rocky ridge beside Megan and Lauren as they opened the carriers. The two lynx cubs stepped out, hesitating at first, then padding toward the trees. One paused halfway, turning its head for a brief moment. Their eyes met, a flicker of recognition, then the cub vanished into the wild. Clay exhaled slowly. "Go on," he murmured. Megan rested a hand on his shoulder. "You gave them a second chance." He nodded, watching the forest swallow them whole. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, the storm long gone. For the first time in months, the valley felt quiet, the kind of quiet that meant peace, not fear. Clay looked toward the mountains, the place where it had all begun, and whispered to himself, "Worth it."